and she's a, so that's it. So Shona is from South Africa, and she's one of our current fellows. Oh no, sorry, she's an alumni from last year and studied an MSc in renewable energy and environmental finance in UCD. Shona has previously worked at the South African Reserve Bank as an economist and has been doing solar research in the clean energy technology team in Dublin. So Shona, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Eileen. Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here today and share with you and speak with you. Yes, I'll just jump right into it. So I did my MSc last year at Smurfit in Dublin. And basically the degree is structured around giving background into both the finance studies as well as very focused on climate. So there were coverage of green data science, policy analysis, ESG, project development. And this led to a lot of alumni going into various fields. So some people are currently on the ground developing wind farms, solar farms globally. Some are helping out ESG's funds. Some are trading energy in Europe. So it's a very broad-based degree. And in the market, it's quite competitive because there isn't really something available that sort of clumps all of these various skills together. So in terms of my research, this degree basically offers you 3 pathways in your final semester where you could either do completely course-based work, or you could do an internship or a thesis. I chose an internship and I am still working at my job where I completed my internship at. So I'm currently at IHS Markit in their global clean energy technology team. Just a little bit about the company. It is an information provider. And what our team does, we basically cover any type of analysis or insights or data for various green technologies. So that's including solar, batteries, wind, hydrogen, carbon sequestration. And basically what we do is gather loads of data, produce research reports on a quarterly basis, and host various webinars and events where experts across the world, different fields, can come and share their insights. And just a little bit about what my day-to-day is. I cover 2 broad streams, so both upstream and downstream. On the upstream, I mainly track data pertaining to solar inverters. That's a piece of equipment within a solar system that converts the energy that you receive from a solar panel into energy required in order for us to use it on the grid. And then on the downstream side, my focus mainly covers Middle East and Africa. And that's where I get to cover my hometown, South Africa, and see what's happening on the ground there. We can see that definitely there's a lot happening recently in terms of more adoption of green energy, clean energy tech. There's a lot more pressure from international bodies in terms of becoming a lot more green. So that's placing a lot of pressure on countries, developing countries, as well as a country such as South Africa, where our primary energy source is coal-based. But I think that definitely over recent years, we've made a lot more progress in terms of being a lot more receptive to these types of technologies. You're seeing a lot of mining companies adopting more solar. You're seeing municipalities tendering solar or renewable energy. We're seeing government tenders being launched. We've gotten a recent one, which is the first hybrid type of government tender, which has resulted in extreme amounts of green energy being procured. Currently, that round is delayed in terms of financial closure, and we're waiting for that to close up so that the next round of tenders can be released. And just recently, we've actually gotten there's a webinar or a conference happening right now in Cape Town. And the Minister of Mineral Resources and Environment announced that the next round of tenders will be announced next month. So hopefully we'll get to see a lot more. We've got 2 rounds up for launching this year. So fingers crossed that we can get some movement on the ground there. But outside of the government, we're also seeing a lot more traction gaining on the private sector, where there's a lot more interest from foreign investors in terms of setting up manufacturing capabilities. There's a lot more upskilling of local employment in order for there to be more skills-based and employment growth. And that's also been echoed. You're seeing a lot more receptiveness with the mining trade unions, where previously we would have loads of these communities which were out at fear of being displaced if we start closing up coal mines and power stations, because generally that's the economic churn, and that's where people in those villages get their employment from. So we've seen that the dialogue has definitely taken a more positive turn, and people are a lot more receptive to, okay, we're not going to, by closing up this coal-based plant, we're not going to lose our jobs. Let's see how we can get skilled and start moving into how we can contribute to the transition. So yes, that's basically what I'm seeing in South Africa. We're seeing it's a very positive turn. Things are a bit slow, loads of delays, but I've been speaking to quite a bit of professionals on the ground there, and everyone seems to be a lot more positive about the way that the attitude is changing. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Shauna. That was really interesting, and it's great that you have the chance to monitor all of this progress from Dublin as well and back to your hometown. It's great to make those links. Yeah, really interesting, and also looking forward to some questions, some Q&A on your presentation later. Our next speaker is Bipen Prakash, who's been studying MSc in climate change in Maynooth University. Bipen is from Fiji, and he's worked as a senior climatologist in the National Meteorological Service in Fiji. And he's also been involved in the IPCC approval process for Fiji and worked as a negotiator related to science and review in the UNFCCC. So Bipen is going to give us a presentation now. I see the slideshow is already up, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Aline, and it's a pleasure to be given this opportunity. So I wanted to begin with some background information from my home country. So Fiji is a small island state in the Pacific Islands, so located close to Australia and New Zealand. It's a island of close to more than 300 islands. In fact, it has a population of around 1 million. Our economy is largely dependent on tourism, but we also have a large agricultural base as well. In particular, we export sugar to a number of European countries. Fiji, like other small island developing states, is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the picture which you are seeing on the bottom left is the impact of a tropical cyclone which affected Fiji in 2016. It wiped off close to 1/3 of Fiji's GDP. And since then, start of the pandemic in 2020, we had 6 more tropical cyclones. So these back-to-back disasters, and because of our huge reliance on tourism and because of the COVID situation, probably you can just imagine, how the people and the economy in Fiji is, surviving at present. Tropical cyclone is not the only issue for Fiji. We are impacted with several other climate change related impacts, such as floods, droughts, sea level rise, and many more. So the picture on the bottom right, it's of a community which was relocated in 2014. This whole community was relocated from a coastal area to a higher elevation, and this is just one example of some of the actions which is already happening on the ground in Fiji. So Fiji was, I believe Fiji was the first country in the world to develop a policy with reference to climate change relocation. So in 2018, Fiji launched the planned relocation guideline, and a year later, a guideline on the displacement was launched, and now it's in the process of developing a standard operating procedure for plane relocation guideline. So things in our part of the world with reference to climate change is already on the move. So I work at the National Meteorological Service in Fiji. That is Fiji Meteorological Service. Fiji Meteorological Service is designated as the regional specialized meteorological center by the World Meteorological Organization. So it's one of the 6 regional specialized meteorological centers in the world, and its key responsibility is to provide tropical cyclone warnings and advisories for a large area of the Southwest Pacific. I work in particular in the climate services. So like Eileen mentioned, I have the opportunity to represent my country in the negotiations of UNFCCC, especially with matters relating to science and review. I also have been involved in the IPCC approval process. So basically climate monitoring and prediction, that's my bread and butter. So MSc in climate change, so I'm doing this program at the Maynooth University. It is very relevant to my field of work. In particular, I would like to bring your attention to modules such as detection and attribution. Though people in my country, they know or they feel like tropical cyclone intensities are increasing, rainfall intensities are increasing. There's greater variability in rainfall, and many of the issues which we are facing. We want to also back it up with science, relevant science. So modules such as detection and attribution would greatly help in this exercise, whereby we would be able to identify to what extent, for example, this picture of the tropical cyclone, which the devastation of tropical cyclone Winston, which I showed earlier, to what degree it is caused by climate change. So we want to be genuine in our approach. So this sort of modules really help us, and as well as modules like analyzing data using R software packages. It's very relevant for what we do back home. The MSc in climate change program at Maynooth is run by some of the best in the field. So, for example, Professor Peter Thorne is one of the lead authors of the IPCC. My supervisor for my thesis research is Professor Conor Murphy, who has published over 70 PRE with publications. And one of the strong the interest at Maynooth University is with reference to paleoclimatology. So generally speaking, when I was asked what research you're going to undertake for my thesis topic, there's a lot of opportunities. Generally, everyone is aware there's a lot of research gap in the global south. But I chose to look at the rainfall trends in Fiji. The picture which you are shown on the slide is of a recent rainfall event in Fiji just last month. And during this rainfall event, the bar graph at the bottom is showing the 24-hour rainfall. And on one particular day, I think on 9th of January, more than 500 millimeters of rainfall was recorded at this station. Just to give you a comparison, the highest ever recorded rainfall for Ireland is 243.5 millimeters in County Kerry. But in this event, more than 500 millimeters of rainfall. And mind you, this was not a record rainfall for Fiji. So extremes of rainfall, how it is changing is very relevant for Fiji. Limited research is available for that. Not only my research will look at rainfall trends in Fiji, it will also ensure provision of high quality data set which can be later used for seasonal prediction, climate model validation, and many other things. That's it, and I'm looking forward to further discussion in the upcoming sessions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pipan. That was really interesting. We have a few projects that are focused on the small island developing states, and I think at COP26 we also had a side event actually that highlighted the situation in Fiji in particular. And yeah, what you were saying earlier about the third of the GDP being wiped out by extreme weather event, it's really catastrophic. So it's something that we all need to be aware of. So thanks very much for that presentation. We're going to move on to our next presenter, who is Maggie. Bipen, you might need to just stop sharing it, and then Maggie can get her presentation up. So Maggie is studying an MSc in climate change policy, media and society in DCU. Maggie comes from Zambia and has worked as a journalist and social change activist. She has experience working with NGOs in Zambia, and her journalism has touched on the effects of climate change on women and children. So please, Maggie, go ahead with your presentation. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present my thesis and my work with you. So my thesis and my work really looks at the social aspect of climate change and what it just means to that woman and child who is in a rural area that might not really understand all the technical sides of climate change. So as we've already been told, I am doing a master's in climate change, policy, media, and society. But in the program, what's of interest to me is how the policies are being implemented and how is the community being positioned and being prepared for a transition to a carbon neutral country. And at the center of all that, in ensuring that society is adequately prepared for transition, there's a big role that the media plays, and that is where my interest comes in. As we might already know, countries like Zambia have very little to do with the historical context of climate change and the emissions of carbon dioxide as it may be. But we also know that the effects thereof of climate change are being felt most by the people that actually contributed less to the problem in the first place. However, climate change is already here, and how do we then ensure that the people that are being affected the most are being cushioned against this effect, are being prepared, and they are aware of what's happening and how they can then just transition their lives as well at family level. So that is what I am focusing on. So this picture that we're seeing right now, that's a maize field in one of the provinces of Zambia. This was in 2019. We had a drought, and this is now 2022, where the country is experiencing floods. We've so far recorded one cyclone, which I must say that in the history of Zambia, cyclones are things that we did not know previously. But now, because of climate change, we now know what a cyclone is and how it's like. So we have a lot of flooding, and cooperating partners are trying to help us with resources to cope with it. But what does this mean whenever we have a drought and a flood? It means that the food security of some child and some woman somewhere is compromised, and they might not be able to meet their daily needs. And this has a ripple effect on their health, their education, and the list goes on. So that is what my research is looking at, to say, how then do we educate these people that might not know what climate change is all about, but are feeling the effect? How do we then educate them? That is where the media now plays a role in it. Just a context for people that might not know Zambia very well. We have, most people in rural areas still depend on mass media for their information about everything. So media is very important in our country, and it is a credible source of information, education, and influencing. So now that is what I'm trying to do in my thesis. How then do we use the media to just educate rural people about climate change and how they can build a more resilient livelihood, both at community and at household level. So my thesis is looking at a media framing of climate change and its influence on the transition to a carbon neutral country, hopefully by 2050. As a country, really don't have targets, despite having signed up to all the international treaties, but how then does the media just help individuals and the country at large transition to a carbon neutral society? And my thesis will be trying to answer questions as, is the media playing an adequate role in ensuring that the public is sensitized on climate change, especially those in rural areas? As I have said, people in rural areas only have access to a radio as the only source of information. They don't have internet, and their opinion leaders is only the radio. So is the media playing an adequate role to ensure that those people are aware of climate change and what they can do to mitigate against those effects? The other aspect that my thesis will be looking at is how is the media framing the whole issue of climate change? So people that are familiar with framing would agree with me that how an issue is framed has a very big role and impact to do with how people understand that issue and to what aspects they actually consider it as a serious issue to pay attention to. So it's not just enough to report on climate change and the cyclones that we're seeing as a country, but it's also important to understand how then does the media frame those cyclones, and do they inspire change in the community, in the policies that we're making, and in the people that are actually in charge of implementing those policies. That's one of the things that my thesis will be looking at. And also central to this is the role of policy. Policy guides everything that we do, but if you're developing policies that ordinary people do not understand, then you might as well not be doing anything. And the people and media is very important in translating those policies from a very technical document to something that an ordinary person can understand and act upon. So I'm also looking at that, say what is the role of the policies in Zambia, and how do those policies also help and prepare people to transition to a carbon neutral society? Hopefully at the end of my thesis, the whole idea is to put climate change in the media agenda. Those that might not be aware of the agenda setting theory of the media, it simply is a theory that says that if the media continuously covers a particular issue, it seemingly becomes important in the minds of the audience, and as such people act accordingly. So that's one of the things that my thesis wants to do at the end of the day. We want to put climate change in the agenda, in the media agenda. We want appropriate reporting on climate change. We want to hear voices of the people that are affected by climate change, but most importantly, we want to hear voices of how are people that are being affected by climate change building a more resilient lifestyle for themselves, hoping then that those voices of change can be transmitted to as many communities as possible, so that people learn from each other what can be done to ensure that we protect ourselves against the effects of climate change. And my thesis also works to ensure that climate change is adequately covered, as I've already said, and does influence the implementation of progressive climate change policies. So we do have the policies in place, but it's just a matter of making sure that those policies are being implemented and the people that are in charge of implementing those things are actually doing their job. And therefore, media also becomes very important to ensure that it holds duty bearers accountable to the policies that they put in place. Also, at the end of the day, my thesis wants to educate the audience on climate change and, most importantly, influence behavior. So at the end of the day, my thesis is really on media and influencing the media, and how then we can influence behavior of the ordinary people to ensure that we are both climate resilient and that we know how to, the mitigation and adaptation processes are all in place. People should be aware of what climate change is, and they should know how to protect themselves. So it's really just getting that rural woman from knowing nothing about climate change to really being an expert in her own right, about climate change. So that is what my thesis is about. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a million, Maggie. That was great. Yeah, and it's really interesting what you say. Sometimes if people don't see something in the media, they automatically think it isn't important. And it's those voices that you were talking about, people talking about their experience of climate change, that sometimes pushes media outlets to cover it more. And that's when we really see change coming in people's minds about our attitudes towards it. So that was great. We're going to move on to our last presenter. And this is Fakhri. He tried to help me pronounce his name properly yesterday in our practice session. Fakhri comes from Palestine and is studying a master's in engineering and science in water waste and environmental engineering in UCD. He has lots of experience with debating, and he's acted as a representative of the Palestinian youth in the Youth and Researchers Program in UNESCO. I'm just going to see if we can get his presentation up here. So we need to stop sharing Maggie's presentation so that Fakhri can put his presentation on the screen.
Okay.
Great.
So, hello everyone. First, I want to thank all the participants for being here today. It's such an honor. I also want to extend my thanks to ICOS and for the Department of Foreign Affairs for holding such an incredible meeting. I've always been fond of the concept of global citizenship and helping each other and working hand in hand to solve greater issues. So this is why I'm very happy today to be hearing about Zambia, Fiji, South Africa. So today I'll be sharing some information about the Palestinian water resources or the Palestinian water situation under artificial and natural effects, including climate change. I'm gonna try to be brief. It has a lot of numbers in it, so bear with me, guys. First of all, we have to understand that the total water resources in Palestine, the whole of historical Palestine, is around 2,600 million cubic meters per year. This is divided into three main categories, which is groundwater basins with almost 1,400 million cubic meters, runoff 215, and the Jordan River with about 970 million cubic meters per year. The runoff mostly goes to valleys. We also have to understand that after Oslo 1995, the agreement regarding the use of groundwater in the West Bank, which can be seen here on the right side of the map. We have three main basins in the West Bank, which are the Eastern, Northeastern, and the Western, with a total of 679 million cubic meters of recharge per year. Let's just remember this number, 679 million cubic meters per year, should be allowed for the people of the West Bank to use. Now, this is what's actually happening. If we look at the groundwater part, the first line, we'll see that what's actually available for the or allowed for the Palestinians, and this is in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, is around 251 million cubic meters per year, instead of 679 million cubic meters per year only for the West Bank. And now talking more generally, from all the water resources, which are the Jordan River, groundwater, and runoff, Palestinians control only 11% of the water resources of the historical Palestine, while the Israelis control 89%. Another part we can talk about is the Jordan River utilization. And I just want to say this is a modern day application of Caesar's law. What's for Caesar is Caesar's, and what's for others is also for Caesar. At the left side, you can see the Jordan River utilization based on the international law and catchment distribution where the rain falls. Palestine should be getting around 11%, Israel 11.6%, and Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon would divide the rest between them. But what actually is happening is, we can see it on the right side, where Israel is getting around 60% of the Jordan River water, and Palestine is getting 0%. This picture would give us a better representation of the situation on the liter per capita per day perspective, let's say. On an agricultural level, a normal Palestinian citizen would use 140 liters per day, while an Israeli citizen would have the ability to use 574 liters per capita per day. Fun fact is agricultural effect on the Israeli GDP is 2%. Agriculture helps 2% of the Israeli GDP, and they are using half of the water in the all of historical Palestine to help with those 2%. We can see this also happening on the domestic and industrial level, with almost 4 or 3.5 times for the Israeli water consumption per capita compared to the Palestinian consumption. Now talking more about the climate trends, there is very high confidence that temperatures have risen in the past 100 years, and there is some sort of low confidence that there are huge changes in the annual or seasonal rainfall in the past 50 years. According to the IPCC, just to quantify what we're talking about, there are 3 main scenarios. The more optimistic scenario concludes that by 2090, there will be an increase of 2 Celsius in the Palestinian region, but there won't be any major change in rainfalls. A more realistic estimation says that there would be an increase of 3 Celsius by 2090 and a decrease by 20% in the rainfall. And the final scenario, which is a bit pessimistic, concludes that there would be an increase of almost 4.5 Celsius by 2090 and a 30% decrease in rainfall. How would that affect the water situation or climate sensitivity? Of course, reduced rainfall means lower recharge of the groundwater, and as we have seen, the dependence on groundwater is very large in Palestine. We don't have main focus on surface water. Also, high temperatures would lead to higher or an increase in demand for water, mainly in the agricultural aspect. And with less water or less recharge happening, this would have a doubled effect. Moreover, when we have climate change, less stable water or precipitation ratios, more runoff, this would lead to more flooding, which can be very serious if not defended well. Also, we would find or we would encounter buildup of solid waste and rubbish because of less precipitation. And furthermore, the Gaza situation is very hard. This needs a full presentation on its own. We are seeing a lot of unlicensed wells being done due to the many hardships they are facing. Overpumping, which is causing a lot of salt building up in the water resources. What are we doing to adapt with the situation? Mainly, there is work on fixing, improving, or the rehabilitation of water resources, wells and canals. Leakage from the distribution systems or water distribution networks is a big issue also in some areas. So controlling that and improving the water distribution networks is a priority. The allocation of transboundary water in an equitable manner. This should be one of the main things the international community also focuses on. Enhancing the use of treated wastewater, other water resources. Moreover, developing desalination plants in Gaza, which is very important. Actually, this concludes my presentation. I hope I didn't give a lot of numbers and confuse you guys, but as I said, I feel it is essential to see what's happening around the world, and this is why I'm very happy. And I think this should be expanded. We should get to know more about each other, because if you don't know what's happening around the world, we'll never fix anything. And one country, one hand cannot clap alone. So I hope this is the first step towards greater associations and helping each other. And thank you all for being here today.
Thanks a million, Fakhri. And yeah, that was a great presentation, really showing a frightening picture of what happens when climate change is compounded by, or when the very complex political situation is compounded by climate change. Yeah, it was very interesting to hear about some of the adaptation measures that are going on in Palestine. I actually recently watched a video about the desalination efforts in Palestine, so it was good to see that in your presentation. Thanks to all of the speakers. They were really, really excellent presentations there, and I hope everybody got a lot from it. We're going to move on to some Q&A now. I do have a few questions myself, but I do want to open it up to colleagues who are on the call from across the DFA, but also from the fellows and alumni who are also on the call as well. I think perhaps the easiest thing might be to use the hand signal. You can put questions in the chat box if you don't want to take the floor, and then I can read them out. But also it would be nice for everybody to see each other's faces maybe, and keep it a bit informal. So if you do want to turn on your camera and ask a question, you're free to do so as well. I'll just wait and see if anybody wants to ask a question. I can see Jen has her hand up. Jen, do you want to come in? Oh, can't hear you, Jen. Jen, can anybody else hear Jen? Nope. Maybe we'll see if Jen can get her microphone working. Otherwise, let's see if there's anybody else. There's no other hands up at the moment. Maybe I'll come in with a question myself then while we're waiting. Maggie, I had a question just about what you were bringing up about the media, and I was wondering, in your research, did you also look at negative coverage of climate change? I know you were talking about like trying to make people aware about climate change. I was wondering if you also came across when it was covered in the other way as well.
So I actually haven't started the research yet. I am a current fellow and our research is starting next month, but it's something that I will look out for. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions?
Hi, is my mic working there?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jen.
Right. Sorry, thanks a million, and really great presentations. You brought us to, I think, different parts of the world for very different issues, but in a really coherent way, so that was excellent, thank you. I have a question on the presentation about Fiji for Bipan. You talked about the relocation and the need for entire communities to relocate. And one thing we hear quite often in the UNFCCC processes is people's concerns about what they leave behind that can't be translated into money or into property. So it's the non-economic losses, and these are like burial sites, heritage sites. So if somebody's entire family has been buried in a certain cemetery, and then they need to move away, or traditional sites or religious locations and things like that. Can you speak a little bit about how that's been managed in the relocations in Fiji, and some of the ideas that are there for trying to also help people to maintain some of those non-economic losses, and that would be very helpful. And I have also a question, a very quick question on the seaweed, and what is this innovative swimwear for women made from seaweed, if you have any information on that, because it sounds really intriguing and interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. Maybe we'll go to Bipan first.
Right. Thank you, Jen. I think it's a really great question, and the cultural aspects can become a facilitator and also a barrier to climate change adaptation. And there's at least a couple of publications I have come across, especially in Fijian context. So, for example, like you have alluded, things like people's attachment to land, people's attachment to, their houses and, burial sites. So in the Fijian context, how, it was addressed was to, so it needs to be for any relocation. So from our experience, what we have noted, and like I said, probably Fiji was one of the best countries in the world to develop a planned relocation guideline. So, and it's something which we are learning as we are progressing. And one of the things which we have learned is that, the 2014 planned relocation, which I showed, it was not the best one. There were others before that as well. So one of the things which we have learned for any relocation to be successful, one of the key ingredients is that it needs to be community driven. So if there's so the situation in the 2014 relocation, for example, the situation was so bad that the community itself, to a large number of years, they were very reluctant to move, but finally they gave up and, they approached the government themselves, and that's how the communities were relocated. So in the Fiji's planned relocation guideline, one of the key requirements and one of the principles for relocation, planned relocation, is that it needs to be community driven. So that's one of the key aspects, I think.
Thanks, very good. I don't know if we still have Winston to answer Jen's other question. Winston, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
I hear you now, yeah. Hi, Winston. Did you get Jen's question?
Yes, I did. So this company is operated by women, young women who they've been working with other international startups, global international startups, doing the exact same thing. It's converting the seaweed into fabrics. It's not just swimwear. It's also they focus on other types of apparels. But I think that this project is focused on the actual swimwear. And I think they had a fashion show set for, it was last year, I think, but then COVID came and that just disrupted the entire thing. But maybe on our next on our next meeting, it will be great to see. Maybe we can arrange to have a presentation by some of these groups to this broader body, and I'm absolutely sure that they'll be more than happy to do that. But it's all about turning the seaweed into fabric. Yeah.
That's great, and that's a good idea for a follow-up as well. We might follow up after this meeting. I'll let Martin come in first with a question, and then Maeve.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen, and thanks everybody for the great presentations. They've been really enlightening. My question is actually for Winston as well. And Winston, I commend you on your decision of going to University College Cork, my alma mater as well. So we have that in common. But just in terms of the sargassum, you showed us what can happen to marine ecosystems in a 1 degree world, or what. Are there forecasts for what happens in a world that approaches 1.5 degrees and beyond? And linked to that as well, I mean, I understand it's very difficult to stop these sargassum blooms, and I think the work on creating fabrics from the seaweed is a great idea. Do you think that type of work can be scaled up to reduce these blooms, or are there any other ways we can address this problem that you come across? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it was an honor attending University College Cork. Unfortunately, I may have arrived at the worst time ever. That was beginning of 2020. So I like to brag to my friends. I only saw the campus 3 times because we were pretty much through lockdown, unfortunately. Yeah, so there are we continue to look for ways that we can deal with this issue. Unfortunately, one of our greater challenge being small developed states is scaling, right? So upscaling would mean that we would either have to export some of our talent or have other persons coming. What we want to be able to do is to get our people involved in coming up with these ideas and solutions. And it is not the most economically the research process is not the most economically savvy thing. So we've been trying our best to find ways of ensuring that we can hold on to these groups, hold on to these young persons. But any assistance at all that we can have, any type of collaborations that we can have, any ideas that you may have, we'll be happy. APCEP is also a global innovation center. We partner with UNAPS, that's the United Nations Office for Project Services. And so we are a part of a global network of innovation centers, and so we do share. We're also launching out throughout the region. I think we have made some connections in Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia. And all of these islands are dealing with the exact same thing. And the most beautiful thing is that everybody comes up with different types of different solutions. I know in Barbados, they now have turned that seaweed into fertilizer. And it seems to be a very good business. Some women are also, I think in St. Lucia, using it as a facial scrub or body scrub. I've heard of it being turned into a detergent. And I think this is where Sweden came in, that they were doing quite a bit. So part of the negotiations in relation to Sweden and Japan is that whilst we are supplying the actual seaweed, we also get to participate in the research. So we share those opportunities. Yeah, so the long and short of it is that we continue to just to find creative ways, and if there are any ways that we can partner with anybody at all, we'll be more than happy so to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Winston. I'm gonna let Maeve come in with a question as well.
Thanks very much, Eileen. I hope you can hear me okay. My connection, it's been a bit patchy this afternoon. I had a question for Shauna actually about that in relation to your presentation. And again, thanks to everybody, really, really interesting and diverse presentations this afternoon. But I just wanted a couple of questions, Shauna, on this, the landscape of renewable energy in South Africa. And particularly because South Africa could be such an amazing front runner amongst its peers in terms of the size of its economy and the fact that it's a developing country as well, that's trying to transition its energy systems. So for that, it's like my question's kind of around what have you seen maybe the barriers to renewable energy in kind of its expansion in the overall energy market in South Africa, and also like the level of competitiveness, because interestingly, I think there's South Africa faces, I imagine, some competition with the likes of coal, and the fact that, you know, like developed countries, fossil fuels has historically been very heavily subsidized. So there hasn't been a level playing field between fossil fuels and green energy. So I just wonder if you have any kind of views on that, the barriers facing that the renewable energy sector in its transition, and that's part of how split, but and where you see the pace going from here. And then linked to that is the access to international funding for it, and whether it's either a finance question
I think Maeve is slightly frozen there. We'll just wait a couple of seconds, but if not.
Oh, you're muted, Eileen.
we can wait and see if Maeve comes back. But in the meantime, did you catch Maeve's first question?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question and definitely top of mind for South Africa. That's generally the discussion, right? Because we have such strong solar resource and wind resource, and we have a plentiful amount of land available for these projects to be completed. So the question is, why isn't it being completed? And the biggest barrier to entry, I think, is on the policy side. So it's very difficult to transition if most of the policies that you have in place are favored toward coal energy. So there's definitely been a bit of a shift in terms of addressing these things. And last year, there were licensing requirements that were lifted to allow for an easier implementation of larger projects up to about 100 megawatts. So that lessens the red tape. So definitely the barriers are more on the administrative side and the policy side of things. It used to be a financial question, but we're seeing so many new innovative solutions coming out for finance. We're seeing a lot more partnerships with international bodies. We've just seen a partnership being made, I think, with a development bank in Europe. We're seeing a lot more international competitors coming into the country. But the biggest barrier is, in terms of, at least on the side of the tenders, is that we have local content requirements for projects to be implemented if you win a tender. So on average, it's about the fact that about 40% of your components need to be locally sourced. And because we have a free trade agreement with China, that makes it even more difficult, because Chinese goods are notoriously cheap, and adding that on with a free trade agreement, it makes it even more cheap. So if you start requiring local manufacturing, one, we don't really have the capacities. We don't have that many manufacturing plants available. With the first round of tenders, when those came about, there was a huge influx of investment in terms of establishing those types of manufacturing capacities. But because there's so many delays, though, it just didn't become financially viable anymore. So I think we have one solar manufacturing plant for modules, and we have one for inverters. But that company, I spoke to the factory, and they produce the inverters on an order basis, and they're not really doing it on a widespread basis. So often what we're seeing is, with each round of tenders, there's an exemption clause provided for these projects. And that just feeds into the issue, because if we're continuously receiving exemptions, i.e. the EPCs, they can procure parts that are imported rather than locally sourced. And because two, the demand is not stable because we keep having these delays, there's less of an incentive to invest in the local manufacturing, because it's just not a financially viable option for companies. But we're definitely seeing a change. Most of what industry is saying is that lifting of licensing requirements is going to boost that type of demand in terms of projects up to 100 megawatts. We're seeing mining companies having increasingly more pressure from their stakeholders, their shareholders, to become a lot more green. So I've spoken to quite a bit of developers whose clients are mines, and they say they cannot get a break. So mines are continuously phoning, and they're having to turn them away because they just don't have the capacities to meet that demand at the moment. So we're definitely seeing a turnaround in terms of the attitude towards renewable adoption in South Africa. But there's also infrastructural barriers. So we've just seen that one of the most popular areas for these tenders, which was the Northern Cape, not one of the most recent tender rounds, not one project was approved for the location in that province, because the grid it has no more capacity to take on further energy. So we're seeing a lot more movement into provinces that previously didn't have any projects being approved in those areas. So definitely more investments needed on the infrastructural side to get the grid and transmission network up and running. But we're definitely seeing a change. There's definitely a tonal change. Minister Gwede Mantashe was notoriously thought of as the anti-green minister and the pro-coal but it seems that he's changed his tone recently. And in terms of the finance, it's definitely a strong movement toward becoming a lot more, having it be more accessible. We're seeing that banks as well in South Africa are packaging mortgages in a better way, where homeowners are able to adopt a solar system for their home as well as battery add-on, because they find that it's actually cheaper in the long run. And it helps the homeowners be able to pay their mortgage off in the long run, because electricity prices are also so high and they're consistently increasing. I mean, they were increased about 16% last year, and now I think they're about to get an approval for a 23% increase once again. And we're having constant load shedding. So on the homeowner side and CNI side, it just seems to be that they just want to get grid independence. So definitely, I think there's a strong movement towards renewable energy despite the policy hurdles.
That's great. Thanks very much for that answer. We're running quite short on time now, so I'm going to let Marie-Therese and Inan come in with their questions, because their hands are already up, and we're going to try and keep the answers as concise as we can, just so that we all have time to go into the breakout room. So Inan, do you want to go first with your question?
Yeah, thanks. I'll just keep it short. I had a question for Maggie and also Fakhri. My first question for Maggie was, it's very interesting in science communication, given the short attention spans that we have today in the modern age. And it's very important for individual impact, environmental politics, and at the end of the day, even environmental finance. So do you think that through your research, did you find out that is there more impact in today's daily scroll media, such as Twitter or Instagram? Like, did you find anything interesting that made those areas of media more impactful? And my question for Fakhri was, in a country like Palestine, where one of the solutions for adaptation that you mentioned was identifying transboundary water resources in a more equitable manner. Like, I know I have heard that, like, for example, water wells have been destroyed because there are conflicts with land areas. So like, how do you go? Have you found out like a solution of how aid can be provided in a way that it could actually be in a long-term manner, and like these kind of conflicts will not destroy the aid that's going towards? Yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
Two great questions there. I'm going to go to Maggie first for an answer.
All right, thank you for that question. So like on the global scale, the situation is the same. It's the most vulnerable people that are hit the most by the effects of climate change. So Zambia's economy is copper-based as well as agriculture-based. The majority of the people are engaged in subsistence agriculture, and these are the people that are found in rural areas, in the villages, far away from mobile network or internet. So the media at large, especially community radio stations, are their only source of information. So in such communities, they really have no other access to information or opinions apart from radio. So it is for that reason that my research is looking at their only source of information. How impactful is it when it comes to issues of educating the rural areas about climate change? So I'm not really focusing on the urban people, because those have access to internet, and research has shown that mass media might not be as effective anymore when it comes to influencing decisions. But what about in the rural areas where they only have radios? How influential then is media, and its impact on communicating climate change? So my thesis is more of the rural areas, the people that are most vulnerable to climate change. Because when you have a flood or you have a drought, it's a maize field that gets dry or gets damaged. And it's that poor farmer that has no access to any other livelihood or any other source of information that I'm really focusing on. And their only source of information is usually community radio stations. I don't know if I've answered the question.
Thanks very much, Maggie. And we'll quickly move to Fakhri to answer Inan's question.
Okay, thank you for your question. It was a great question. it had a lot of parts in it, so I'll try to conclude as much as I can. First, you've asked how could like the whole transboundary issue be fixed? Well, one of the issues is like, it's not, I really love talking about the occupation, but it is a major player in this. So first of all, one thing that I always think about is the quantification of agreements. That's bad, because we can't say that in 2020, let's say Fakhri will take 20 liters and Eileen will take 40 liters, because in 50 years, we won't have the total of 60 liters. So the whole quantification of agreements and political agreements isn't very suitable, especially when one side of the story is much stronger army-wise. So there should be quotas, I think. This is one of the solutions we can have. Also having international pressure and support. Sometimes we like to lay out the facts just for any normal person to know what's happening. So having international support for the cause of freedom and equitable rights for everyone, that's a very also important key player. The last part, I'm not sure, you talked about some support provided to Palestine being destroyed. I don't know if you meant by Palestinians, which I've never heard of, or from the Israelis. But if we're accepting that Israeli forces are destroying support for Palestinians on Palestinian lands, that's actually even more sad and shouldn't be acceptable. So we're saying that we're helping someone, and if the bad guys are destroying our help, we're gonna stop helping them. So no, I think the support should be even stronger. It should be showed off more to know what's happening. It's not just about the physical support, it's also about the emotional and international support, and making the story heard and known by more people. I'm sorry if I haven't like answered all the parts of your question, but like I think I concluded as much as I can. Thank you.
That was great. Thanks very much, Fakhri, and for keeping it short and concise. I think if you hadn't managed to answer the question, then you'll be able to hopefully chat a little bit more after this. So we're going to now, I can see that Jodian has their hand up, but I'm just going to be strict with myself that I cut off the Q&A list at that point, and hope that maybe that question will be able to be answered in the breakout rooms. And if not, we'll pass on details about how people can stay in contact after this session. So we're going into breakout rooms now. Everybody should see at the bottom of their panel, there's a little button called breakout rooms. And if you click it, you should be able to see the different rooms there. There's climate change science, food security and water, climate change, law, media and advocacy, and engineering, economy and tech. And everybody can just click to join beside it, and you'll magically go into those rooms. And when we're running towards the end of the time, you'll see a button pop up to come back into the main room that Tayan is going to help me with. But if everyone wants to choose their room in the meantime, I'll see you back here in about half an hour. Informal. Okay, and have some informal chats and exchange of ideas. We're so tight on time, but if one person from each group could just give a couple of sentences about what you talked about in the breakout rooms, that would be great. I know that I was in breakout room 1, which was climate change science, blue economy and the marine, and Sarah from our group is going to give a couple of sentences telling everyone what we discussed.
Hello. So we had a good chat about what we liked most about the ocean, or something that clicks. And some of the cool things that came out was that the ocean changed someone's career trajectory. After snorkeling for the first time at 18, they got into environment and henceforth studying environmental science. So yay. Two things we spoke about mainly. The first one related to marine protected areas. What are the requirements per se for those to be transformed from paper parks to areas that actively conserve and protect biodiversity? And so a few of us share our experiences from our countries, and Martin also spoke a little bit about Ireland. Secondly, we spoke about the knowledge necessary for ocean protection and management, and our breakout group closed just as we were wrapping that up. But the idea was that we need information, we need data to be able to plan for effective marine conservation and management.
Great, perfect synopsis. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to ask if someone from breakout room 2, which was sustainable agriculture, food security and water, wants to tell us a couple of things about what you discussed. We got someone from that group. No, okay. Well, I'll move on to group 3, which was climate change, law, media, advocacy, policy, and leadership. Does somebody from that group want to give us a couple of sentences about what you discussed?
Hi, I'm Roy from Guinea-Bissau. Among the things that we spoke about is the possibility to see how we can have this alumni group contacts for the future corporations and for the ICOs as well as DAFA to follow up on the alumni work after the graduation and to see how the alumni are working on their projects, if there is possibility kind of to fund or support with the training. Maybe Maggie would like to say something to add up on that because we are also from the same breakout room.
Thanks, Rui. I don't know if somebody else from your room wants to come in. Otherwise, I might move on to the last room. But we were going to come to how people can stay in contact after this. But I'll just see if anyone from breakout room 4, environmental engineering technologies and environmental economics wants to give us a couple of sentences about what you discussed.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to come in on that one. Did Rui want to come in there? Okay, I'll go ahead just in case they can't unmute. But yeah, super interesting discussion in our breakout room. We had Fakhri and Shona who presented to the broader group, and then Choizel and Simon who are studying environmental economics and environment, society and development. So yeah, super interesting topics. From Fakhri, one of the most interesting points I think was around how the public don't quite know a lot of this information, particularly around the water resources that he discussed in Palestine, and about how kind of solutions need to be really holistic and not just kind of focusing on financing or technical assistance, but look at the broader picture. They also need to be led from the top down. From Shona, a really interesting point that Cape Town has actually just yesterday announced that they were buying, I can never remember numbers, but an enormous amount of renewable energy from the grid, so that they're going to be almost off grid in terms of their reliance on renewable energies, which is absolutely fantastic. And then Simon, who's studying environmental economics, spoke to his research or the work that he's planning on doing on putting I suppose a price on the environment, so environmental pricing, particularly around the sort of resource extraction issues that are seen in northern Uganda. So overall, super interesting discussion, and thanks to all the participants.
Sounds great. Thanks, Marie-Therese. Sounds like everyone had really interesting discussions in their groups. We're already over time, but I'm conscious that a lot of people were discussing, this Anayanj, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Was there something you wanted to come in with? You've got your hand up.
Yes, sorry, you'll pardon my manners. I'm in group 2, and it's unfortunate that our point we discussed, yes, we talked about the food insecurity, and we talked in relation to this topic. We said that there's a lot of production of food and the food wastage, which we always realize, mostly in the world and global, which always contribute the climate change, and secondly, we realized that this food wastage at times can realize from the farm, whereby the farmers always sometimes lack some of the information or the ways on which they can access market. So you find that they undergo losses just because of the inaccessibility of the market. And we talked about on some of the solutions that we can solve that. Like we need to create some of the ways, and we need to create some of the connections that we can help our farmers. And we also talk to each and every people, like we create the awareness on how we can avoid the food wastage, something like that. And we talked about the issue of the forestry part of it, and there was a little time about that, so that some of us could maybe come in to discuss about it.
Great, thanks for feeding that back. It's good to hear. Some people manage to go into such depth in their conversations in such a short period of time, so it's great. I'm glad everyone had the opportunity to discuss. I'm going to just wrap up. I'm going to give Sinead and Phelim the opportunity to come in and just give some closing remarks, some conclusions if they wish. Just in terms of keeping in touch, so you all received the invitation for today's session from Tayana, and she's kindly agreed to coordinate. So if anybody wants to get in touch with somebody from their group, or somebody that they met today, or they had a question that they didn't get to ask, they can get in touch with Tayana with their details, and then just to give permission to Tayana for your details to be shared, just so that everything's clear on that side, and then hopefully we'll be able to stay in touch. Phelim, do you want to come in first if you're still on the line?
Sure, very briefly. Just actually on that sort of staying in touch piece, one of our big pieces of work this year is going to be the development of a proper alumni network, so that in the future, you can all stay in touch, and not just with your own cohort, but in fact with people who've preceded you on this program. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you so much to the panelists. I mean, really fascinating presentations on a real incredible range of different, I suppose, angles on the topic for conversation. And as we saw in the Q&A session, the level of interest that sparked was really impressive. I think the Q&A session could have gone on and on and on. I have to say that, I mean, the caliber every year of the Ireland Fellows is really so impressive. I think your respective countries are very lucky to have you. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in today. We've kind of varied between about 45 and we're at 37 at the moment. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for asking questions, for participating in the breakout sessions, which I think were really rich as well. And to thank ICOS for all of the work in putting this together, in particular Diana. And I suppose from the global program side, to thank Liz and Denai, to all of our friends in the climate unit, and in particular, Eileen, to thank you for doing a really great job in taking us through this afternoon. I fear you may have just invented a new job for yourself. Anyway, thanks a lot.
I've definitely enjoyed it. I don't know if I see it as a future job, but I've definitely enjoyed it as much as you have. Thanks, Phelim. Sinead, is there anything you want to say to wrap up?
I want to say Eileen already has a job, Phelim, but nice try. No, but I'm not surprised because you did a wonderful job, Eileen. No, I think Phelim said it all. Such a rich discussion, and as we said in group 3, our sort of actual main conversation was actually a lot about how to keep in touch, and it's great, Phelim, this sort of more structured alumni plan. I think is going to be music to the ears of people in our breakout room. But I also just think for us from the climate perspective, there is just so much of great relevance today, and I think there'll definitely be sort of opportunities for us to keep in touch also with fellows. I suppose one of the particular issues that came up in our group was the impact of COVID and the way in which in normal years there would have been more sort of in-person networking, which then helps the alumni networking. So we probably need to catch up a bit on the last couple of years. So it's wonderful to hear that that's going to happen. But no, just to thank everybody for the time. I think it's been an education for there's pretty much the whole climate team actually is here on the call, and I think I speak for all of us when we say we sort of gained a lot, and we'd love to continue to to have these kind of conversations. Also, when people are back in their day jobs, we might be running into them at COP or something like that. So yeah, thanks a million to everybody for the time, and yeah, look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Sinead. So all that's left is for me to close. Thanks again to all the speakers, to all our participants, to all our colleagues from across the DFA. It was a really rich discussion, and I think we all got a lot from it. And I hope we can stay in touch. As I mentioned, you can get in touch with Sayana if you want to pass on your details to anyone. And yeah, I wish those of you who are studying still in Ireland the best of luck with the rest of your research, and those who've already returned, the best of luck with continuing your climate fight at home. So, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.